Welcome to the first event of Kirkcudbright Book Week. This has been a sell-out event, so that's a great start for this week. And if there are tickets for other things you want, there's some still available through the website, etc. I'm Rosie Eilert, and I'm going to be chairing the session today with Stephen Rutt.
Hello.
So Stephen, as you will know, is now a very well-known and award-winning writer. He calls himself an amateur naturalist. And you can tell a bit more about his journey in a minute. He's written 3 books. The first book, The Seafarers, won the Saltire Society First Book of the Year prize in 2019. And it also won a Roger Deakin Award, and it was longlisted for the Highland Book Prize, which is a brilliant start for your debut book. So, the second book, Wintering, A Season with Geese, was one of the Times Best Nature Books of the Year. And the third book, Eternal Season, was shortlisted for the Saltire Society's Non-Fiction Book of the Year. And Stephen tells me, and he'll tell you more in a minute, his fourth is in process, in production, but he's got other things in his life that are taking up a lot of his time. He's also written for journals and publications, including The Scotsman, Grand to the Guardian, and lots of other outlets. And as you'll know, those of you that have read his books, a lot of his writing is about how humans interact with nature, the impact of the environment on the natural world, and how human behaviour affects everything that is out there that we are unfortunately not always been good at protecting. So I'm going to open with a question, Stephen, which is a bit of a big question, but do you want to tell us a bit about your journey? You know, how did you go from being a kind of keen schoolboy interested in nature from a very early age to now becoming a very well thought of and regarded author?
When you say keen schoolboy,
oh, okay.
I hated school and all I liked was birds. And also all I liked was English at school. I've always been a reader throughout my life. And I had these 2 interests. So at school, you're either into literature or you're into science. And because I was really into birds, I should have been into science, but I faint at the sight of blood, and I don't do numbers, which ruled me out of doing any sort of science at school. So I went down the literature route, and when I was about, dates get hazy, 16, 17, I walked into Waterstones with money from my paper round, and I saw Crow Country by Mark Cocker on the shelf, and I brought it. And as I was reading it, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is beautiful prose. That's ornithologically accurate as well. And I didn't know that nature writing was a thing at that point. The diet at school was Thomas Hardy, Far from the Madding Crowd, which I would probably love now, but when you're 15, it's not what you want. And Wordsworth, who I still despise with great passion. So
You grow into it.
maybe. Anyway, so at this time I was writing a blog because I wanted to be a photographer. First time I went properly birdwatching with my dad, I borrowed his camera, and then for many years I didn't give it back. So I kind of got into birds through the camera lens, and my dad's enthusiasm for it, which just sort of was totally infectious and rubbed off on me, particularly because, like me, my dad's not outwardly an enthusiastic guy, but in that moment he just was, and it just lit a fire in me. And then I found over time, as I was putting my ropey pictures on my blog, that I was like, oh, I need to write something to go with this. And then by the time I was like, I don't know, 19, 20, I found out I was writing this much for one not particularly brilliant picture. And then I sort of gave up with cameras and just completely got into words. Words are cheap, cameras are very expensive.
So one thing I wanted to ask you is, what's the process of writing from, about the natural world? Because do you make notes when you're out and about, or do you reflect when you get back? Was it mixed?
It's a mix. It depends on what I'm doing. So I did a walk for my next book on Tuesday, from Port Glasgow to Greenock, and because I was aware that time right now for me is really limited, I had to make a lot of notes to remember what I've seen, where I saw it, what I felt at the time, and I take lots of pictures still. But if it's just like a blog post or a reflective thing, I'll just be totally in the moment and no notes.
Okay.
But a lot of pictures still. I'm still obsessed with taking pictures. I just don't show them all.
Yeah. Well, they're also prompts, aren't they? Obviously?
Yes,
I mean,
yeah. They
in itself, yeah.
capture things that you might not actually remember seeing, which is interesting in its own way.
And the difference from you were born in Suffolk and you've moved about in England and then you moved up to Scotland, and how's that changed your feelings or thinkings and reflections about nature?
Nature's so different in Scotland to England, which sounds stupid, but it is. So before we moved here, I was living in Essex, near Colchester, walking to Wivenhoe. It's nice. I just feel like I have to say this when I talk about Essex. Essex is nice. Forget everything you know about Essex, it's nice. And I was walking down this river that reminds me of the Nif. It didn't remind me of the Nif then, but it reminds me of the Nif now. Or rather, the Nif reminds me of the Carmine. I need to work on that. Seeing lots of waders, and there were these battered, tatty hedgerows nearby, and every year I would see one lesser whitethroat, one chaffinch, maybe a dunnock. I would not hear a willow warbler. And as I was walking, as I was trying to rationalise this in my head, I was like, there's no insects. And if there's no insects, then there's no birds. That's kind of the simple chain of life. Now Scotland is obviously covered in insects, which is great. And it's why there's like, you can't go outside without seeing a chaffinch. You can't go outside without seeing willow warblers in spring. I remember, so I went to uni at Stirling, and after I'd finished, I was like, what am I going to do? I'll make my mind up while I walked 14 miles across the Trossachs from Aberfoyle to Callander, and then I decided to do a detour towards Benlady, but not up it. And I don't think there was a single moment on that walk where I couldn't hear a willow warbler in May, and it's just amazing. And whereas down south now, if I go outside, I sort of like catch myself after a few going, no, I had a willow warbler. What's that about? It's just weirder, quieter, different. It's obviously very different, but there is the creeping sense that the loss there is much more notable than changes here, because we've still got insects, which means some abundance of life.
Yes, yes. Well, that seems a good point to maybe start off with a reading.
Okay.
Would you like to do that?
Yeah. So this was nominally I think around wintering, although everything I do is nominal. I don't believe in definitions. So I'm going to read to you from the start of Wintering, which is basically entirely about moving home. Autumn begins as a season for movement. And I should say that this started in 2018. We moved here in September 2018, which was just after Essex had a summer where it basically didn't rain and was like 30 degrees every day. And when we were looking at flats in Dumfries, it was amazing. You'd get to the border and suddenly everything would be green again. And England was just brown that year. I'll begin again. Autumn begins as a season for movement and ends with everything changed. From the boggy pools of the Scandinavian tiger forests, west to the far coast of Greenland, and east to the Arctic coast of Siberia, geese are breeding. Throughout the far north, birds have been raising young all summer long, making the most of the season of light and food. From the cliffs of Svalbard, where they have been breeding out of the poor reach of polar bears, barnacle geese goslings have jumped before they are capable of flying, landing in the soft embrace of Arctic tundra. The fortunate will make it. In the volcanic central plateau of Iceland, pink-footed geese have survived a season of being strafed by eagles and battered by the capricious Icelandic climate. These geese of the north are converting food into yellow fat, stored just beneath their skin, ready to fuel the long flight in a scheme pointing south. 5 wild species will head to Britain for the winter, a relative land of plenty and gentler weather, respite from a north that is still ice-blasted and snowbound for the winter. Mid-September in southern England, A long, hot summer is slowly burning up. The grass is parched. We drive north into our new life, and I am not interested in geese yet.